Hello BookTube. Today I'm going to be doing the Friday the 13th franchise book tag. This tag was created by Matt Wall of Paperback Junkie, and he and his wife Zoe Wall tagged me in the original video. Thank you Matt and Zoe for tagging me, and I will leave a link to their video down below. It was a blast. And probably I think the last video they filmed in their trailer before their move this past weekend. So this tag draws its inspiration from the various Friday the 13th franchise movies, possibly the original slate, which I'm not exactly all that up on. I don't really watch horror films or this particular subgenre of horror. But anyway, let's get started. So the questions. Part 1. A book where the mother is the villain. For this one, I'm going to go with A Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. This novel, which is a sequel to Kings of the Wyld, the main antagonist, the Winter's Queen, sorry for the spoilers, but you kind of have to for this question, is the mother of the first book's villain, Lastleaf, who was the Autumn Prince. So in this fantasy world, which is the band sequence, I think, the band series, this extra-dimensional race who are somewhat rabbit-like in appearance, they have elongated ears, conquered the world centuries ago, and what passes for their royal family became godlike for the humans. So that's why the main antagonist of the second book is the Winter Queen. So at the end of the first book, her son, Lastleaf, committed suicide with a sword that was designed to resurrect his mother, who died giving childbirth, and her husband resurrected her, and then at the sacrifice of the child she had, and then it's a whole thing. So yeah, she was a nasty piece of work and a necromancer. Part 2, A Book in the Backwoods. For this, I'm going to go for the first book in this series, Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames. So in this book, there's a whole bunch of kingdoms, and then a huge wood populated by monsters. And before this story begins, bands of mercenaries who are sort of treated like rock stars, and that's the conceit of the band series, is that mercenaries are kind of equivalent to rock stars. So the 5-person band, that whole thing. So they'd go into this wood, I think it's called the Wyld, and it's been a while since I've read it. And they would go slay X number of monsters and all that stuff. So in Kings of the Wyld, there's one famous band called Saga. They'd been disbanded for decades. And the leader of the band gets the band back together to go rescue his daughter, who's Bloody Rose from the sequel, who's gone off to this one distant city-state to stave off a monster attack, or a horde of monsters. And in order to get there, they have to go through the Wyld. And it's a pretty harrowing part of the book. Even though largely depopulated of monsters by this point, it's kind of coming back in a way. Part 3. A book with a masked character. For this one, I'm going to go with The Traitor Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. Yeah, Seth Dickinson. So this is a fantasy series. There are 4 or 5 books, I think, by now. I've only read the first one. I'm only ever going to read the first one. It's about this empire whose upper echelons at least wear masks. And Baru Cormorant, who's from this sort of outlying land, her people are incorporated in the empire relatively early in the first book. And while their imperialism isn't exactly oppressive in ways, I mean, they're educating their new subjects and all of that. I mean, there is a heavy amount of oppression as well, but it's not sort of the, yeah. I mean, it's still, they're still monstrous, but there's an education, there's, I think, more of an assimilationist approach to it rather than a complete, utter subjection. And so Baru Cormorant goes through sort of their educational system and attracts the attention of one of the leaders of the empire, and she sort of becomes his protege. She's given a task to act as a treasurer for another conquered land, and she sort of plays both sides with not only the empire but an incipient rebellion, so that she can rise through the ranks and eventually topple the empire and free her homeland. I didn't really like the book. I thought the character, I didn't buy it. So anyway. Part 4. A book with the best final chapter. This one is hard, because so rarely, few books really do have a good final chapter. I mean, like China Medieval, he always sort of botches the end of his stories. I would think maybe, except for like the sequel Hook, but I really liked how The Last Son by Katie Edwards ended. This sort of get-together barbecue where this found family sort of starting to form. I quite liked it. Part 5. A serious book that changes its protagonist from the first book. So this one's a bit tough. Largely because some of my options are only on the second book. And so, like, say, for example, in City of Lost Fortunes by Brian Camp, the main character is Jude Dubuisson. I think that would be how you pronounced it. And then in the second book, Gather the Fortunes, the main character switches to Renaissance Reigns, who sort of appeared in the first book as a sort of proto-psychopomban in the second book. And Jude is relatively like cameo. But I mean, it's only a second book. So, I mean, does that really count? Because obviously, is Renee going to be the main character going forward? If there are more books in this series, or will the protagonist be changing? I don't know. So, thinking it might not be the best option. And then, I mean, obviously, you have, like, say, A Song of Ice and Fire, where Ned Stark is the main character, the protagonist in the first book, whose death pretty much actually kickstarts the story, and the protagonist becomes more of an ensemble. but I'm like, I don't really want to go with that one either. So I was thinking of manga, and in Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicle by Clamp, they're a sort of a manga team who they've done numerous stories that are really awesome. And this will, in Tsubasa will appear later on. The main character, or the main protagonist, Sioran, he gets replaced about midway through the story with another version of him. So I think I would go with that one. I haven't read all of Tsubasa. I want to say I've read maybe the first 10 or so volumes, and I think they're like 20 or 30. So I really eventually need to settle down and get back to it, but I don't know if I ever will. Part 6. A book with someone or something resurrected from death. So for this one, I could go with City of Lost Fortunes by Brian Camp. The main character, Jude, is murdered about partway through the book, and he is eventually resurrected. Initially in Renaissance Reigns' body, and then he gets his body back. Part 7. A book with a character with telekinesis. This one's interesting because I've been racking my brains and I'm not entirely sure if I have any books that actually feature wizards with telekinesis. Although maybe I could go with the Legend of the Condor Heroes series. I mean, it's kind of nebulous in the book itself, but in the most recent adaptation of the story, there is a fair amount of telekinesis. Some of the chi manipulation, I think, kind of takes the form of telekinesis. So I could go with that. But of course, I mean, there's always the X-Men, in which we have Jean Grey, who is the most powerful telekinetic in the world. Part 8. A book that takes place in New York. For this one, I'm going to go with, I think, The Magicians by Lev Grossman. I think the first part of the book takes place in New York, and I want to say Brakebills is in New York, or it's located in New York, but I could be wrong. And if I am wrong, outside of Quentin living in New York City before he goes to Brakebills, I would go with Charming Billy by Alice McDermott, which is completely set in New York City. And Charming Billy, which I read once in 2017 and again last year, is about a family coming to terms with the alcoholism and death of Billy, the main, not quite the main character, but he's sort of gets a MacGuffin sort of thing. Which I quite liked it the first time I read it, but my second reread, I didn't quite get on with it as well. So, Part 9. A book that takes place in hell or has something to do with the occult. So for this one, I'm going to go with The Devil Rides Out by Dennis Wheatley. This book was adapted as a film in the late 60s as The Devil Rides Out in Britain and The Devil's Bride in the US. And it's part of the De Richelieu series or the Modern Musketeer series. It's about, the series as a whole is about 4 friends, the Duc de Richelieu, Rex Van Ryn, Simon Aaron, and Richard Eaton, who have various adventures. In The Devil Rides Out, Simon Aaron has fallen under the spell of a magician called Makata, who is using his Simon's wealth for his own advantage, and de Richelieu and Van Ryn seek to rescue him with the help of Eaton and his wife, and things go from there. And it's quite enjoyable, although the film version is much better than the book. There's a sequence that takes place in Paris that I thought the book movie was right to cut it. Although there's a scene at Stonehenge that I thought probably could have been kept into the film. But anyway, Part 10. A book that takes place in space. So this one, I'm not entirely sure if like the entire story has to take place in space, or if parts of it could, or if it's just a science fiction setting that's not Earth. But for this one, I'm going to go with, let me see here. Consider Phoebus by Inem Banks, because I think a good chunks of this story takes place on either on a spaceship or a space station or something. So in Consider Phoebus, I'm blanking on the main character's name, but he's working for this one alien species called the Adirans. The Adirans are at war with a massive space federation called the Culture, who are sort of anarcho-Marxist in orientation. And so the Adirans and the Culture have been fighting for decades. And one of the Culture's minds, these sort of super intelligent artificial intelligences, goes missing, and the Adirans want to capture it. So they task one of their agents to go find it. Meanwhile, another culture agent is herself looking for this item, and eventually they kind of both come together and sort of try to find this missing mind on a planet of the dead, guarded by a super advanced race who've basically ascended to a higher plane of existence. Part 11. A book that has characters from different franchises or mashup. So for this one, I'm going to bring back Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicle by Clamp. So Clamp are famous for sort of a shared universe. Several of their series, including Tokyo Babylon, Cardcaptor Sakura, Exholic, X1999, sort of all share a bit of a universe. And while X1999 basically is a crossover with Tokyo Babylon and another one of their series, Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicle kind of does all of them. The main character is sort of the love interest, or a version of the love interest from Cardcaptor Sakura. The main characters from X1999 show up in various forms. Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicle is sort of a massive portal fantasy adventure where the characters go from one world to another, trying to collect all of the pieces of Sakura's soul, I think. Anyway, quite fun. From what I remember of it. Part 12. A book that is a retelling. For this one, I'm going to go with... What is it retelling? I guess I could go with Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which is not not exactly a retelling of the Iliad. It takes place during the Iliad, and it's about Patroclus and Achilles' relationship up to Patroclus' death. I didn't particularly care for the book. I thought Madeline Miller. The thing that Madeline Miller does in Song of Achilles and in Circe, which is her biography of Circe, the Greek witch goddess. What she does is the main character comes off either Achilles, well, in Song of Achilles it's Patroclus, or in Circe, they come off as almost modern characters. That they're very much, their outlook, their characterization, they are incredibly modern. But the rest of the setting, the rest of the characters are all very much what you would think characters in Greek myths would be like if they were presented fairly more realistically than. And doesn't quite jive, I don't think. Or it doesn't really jive for me. But then again, that could also be, there are various versions of the myths that I I gravitate towards that, didn't quite feature, particularly like with Circe. Didn't particularly care for the portrayal of Athena. Where the hell is Hecate or Hecate? That kind of bugged me. So anyway, part 13. A book that you found in a thrift or antique shop. So this one was a bit of a tough one because most of my books, or a good chunk of them, I mean, lately I've been buying more new. But a lot of my books are I bought used, either through like a local used bookstore. Nearest to me, there are two Golden's Book Exchange, which is a old used bookstore and also comic book shop that I've gone to for years. And then there's also Braz's Books, which I quite like as well, although I haven't gone to them as much. But they're not exactly thrift or antique stores. Although there is an antique store that's actually near where I live. I walk past it every time I go to the post office to get a money order, and I've never gone in. I keep saying I want to go in, but I never do. It's a thing. But thinking about it, there is one book that I can categorically say I did get it in a thrift store, and that is I want to say it's Greek drama, edited by Moses Hadas. It's a anthology of several Greek plays, and I picked it up from a thrift store on South Congress in Austin, in probably 2004 or 2005, one of the two. So at the time, I don't know if Austin still does this, or if South Congress still does this. The first or the fourth Thursday of every month, they South Congress Avenue would do specials. They'd have sales on, or extended hours, or something, some kind of cultural thing. And during one of those, me and a group of friends went and we went to a thrift store for some odd reason, and I found where the books were, and I picked it up. It was like the only thing I wanted. So I picked it up. So I think that's the only book I have that I can unambiguously say I picked up in a thrift store. I have gone, when I've gone to thrift stores, I do sometimes look at the books if they have any, although usually they don't quite have what I'm interested in. But you never know. They might eventually. Although what I really would like is some more bookshelves. Anyway. So that was the Friday the 13th franchise book tag. If you would like to do this tag you're it. And I will see you tomorrow, hopefully, with another tag. There have been several really good tags this week so far. And hopefully I will manage to do my second season for Has Steve Read It Season 2 video on Friday afternoon before I do my weekly reads Friday evening. But anyway, we shall see. So until tomorrow book tip, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.